welcome everybody to this evening's session, lecture by Vikas Dilawari. I'm greatly appreciated, Vikas, that you've agreed to do this. I know what a heavy, tight schedule you have, and to take this time out to join us here this evening. Many, many thanks from all of us. On behalf of the chairman and the trustees of the CSMBS, and Mr. Sabyasachi Mukherjee, the Director General, on behalf of the Museum Society, my committee, our members, and our guests who have joined us here this evening, thank you so very much for agreeing to give us this talk on a topic which is going to be really, really interesting. Conservation of the heritage grain of the city, challenges and opportunities. A few words about Vikas. I have known him for many, many years. He's a dear, dear friend, but I would like to say a few words because he's really worked so hard and is a pioneer actually in this field. Vikas is a practicing conservation architect with 3 decades of experience exclusively in the conservation field, ranging from urban to architecture. He has done his double masters in conservation from the School of Planning and Architecture, New Delhi, and from the University of York. He was the head of the Department of Conservation at Kamla Raheja Vidyanidhi Institute of Architecture in Mumbai, right from its inception in 2007 till August 2014. His practice has successfully executed several conservation projects ranging from prime landmarks to the unloved buildings of Mumbai. He was instrumental with Intact Mumbai chapter to list the Chhatrapati Shivaji Terminus Station as a World Heritage Site in 2004. Several of his projects have received national and international recognition. A total of 17 of his projects have won UNESCO Asia Pacific Awards for cultural preservation in Southeast Asia. Of course, needless to say, Mr. Dilawari Vikas has lectured and written extensively on the subject of conservation, both nationally and internationally. So what are we going to hear this evening from Vikas? A journey from conservation to conservation architect. I quote Vikas when he said, "When I developed interest in conservation, it was an emerging discipline in our country, that is in the late 1980s. He was fortunate to be amongst the earliest professionals to have done a double master's in this field. I very clearly remember the eve of your departure for York, Vikas. We were with the late SP Godrej in his cabin, and we were really, really thrilled and congratulated you for being accepted at York. It was going to be a 2-year journey away from Mumbai, but I think every bit of that 2 years has been really, really worth it. The initial years, that is in the 1990s, were more of activism, and hence the term conservation came but with time, as the discipline started getting recognized due to listing and legislation. The opportunities increased. Initially, the projects were smaller and in parts like facade restoration or historic interiors. However, with multinational corporations becoming the patrons, followed by Indian corporate houses, the field got the desired impetus that it actually needed. I don't wish to stand between Vikas and the audience. So once more, Vikas, a warm welcome to you. And before I hand you over to the technical team, I'd like to thank Yashraj, Aishwarya, Mrinalini, ably led by Professor Jason Johns, for doing this yeoman service voluntarily for us, sometimes twice a week. And I would also like to thank my colleague, Professor Dr. Anita Rane Kothari, who will be conducting the Q&A at the end of the session and giving the vote of thanks. So thank you so much, Vikas. Ladies and gentlemen, sit back, enjoy the evening about this beautiful topic of architecture and its conservation. Thank you so very much. Over to you, tech team, and over to you, Vikas.
Thank you, Firoza, for asking me to talk on a subject which is very which I'm very passionate about. We normally talk about landmark buildings, but something which gets neglected is the simple buildings or the heritage grain. And thank you for offering me this opportunity to talk on it. Now, as we all know, R was the first city which started the heritage legislation, which was way back in 1992. And by 95, we had a heritage legislation. But a lot of things have changed, and you can see the skylines are also changing. What we find slightly annoying and disturbing from a pure conservation point of view is that grade 1 landmarks are being dwarfed by other normal buildings. Now, these are not public buildings. These are the grains which are becoming the landmarks. And you can see one kind of an example, which is already there in the skyline of Fort. And with the new DCPR rules coming in, there is an encouragement to such kind of redevelopment. And this is where conservation becomes more important and essential. Now, this is what constitutes a city, the grain of the city, and something which is not protected, which is not listed. And the only thing which is saving it is that the FSI consumed by them is more than what would be permissible. So the very fact, people keep repairing these buildings, and we still see the urban design. As you can see, this is a photograph from Princess Street, where all the buildings are uniform in appearance, and which was a planned effort. And it's surviving very well. But unfortunately, changes have started happening. These will undergo a redevelopment, and that's the concern. Or for that matter, here where you can see the two church spires, where one is Holy Name Cathedral and the other one is Bowman Methodist Church. These were the landmarks which blended with the grain. But unfortunately, the surroundings are now the normal grain is becoming the landmark. So it's disturbing the existing pattern with which the city was very well visible and legible. Now, interestingly, this statistics is something which is very interesting, that we had, initially when the list was there, we had about 41 grade 1 buildings, but unfortunately, these have reduced down to 10. We've added more heritage buildings and precincts, but we've also deleted some of them. The good news is we have 2 World Heritage Sites and a national park, which is within the municipal limit. But unfortunate part is that these World Heritage Sites and its buffer zone, as approved by UNESCO, is not defined or marked in the new DCPR 2034. So that gives a chance and opportunity, where these kind of redevelopments can happen. We had a review committee which has reviewed the list and has forwarded some of the revised listing of certain wards, but other wards are still pending. Now, the thing which is of matter of concern is that the new DCPR 2034 allows grade 3 and precinct buildings to be demolished without the Heritage Committee's permission. And the new redevelopment can go as tall as 32 meters. Now, this is really the matter of concern. And the sad part is that they have to go to the Heritage Committee only to document the heritage property which they want to pull down, which is very unfortunate. So if you really see the percentage of the built stock which comes under heritage would be approximately 7.5% as compared to London or New York, which is more than 25 to 35%. And this 7.5% constitutes real prime estate, real estate, and which is where it is under threat. Now, we all are aware that one of the major problems which we have is the Rent Control Act. And if you can see, the Rent Control Act doesn't allow the rent to be increased. So the landlord doesn't show any incentives or initiatives to maintain it. Thereby, the buildings become weak and they get pulled down. We have something called the cess board or the repair board. Now, these are things which the buildings which come under it are buildings prior to 1940s. So if you assume the buildings to be in 1940s, now it would be about 70 to 80 years old. And many of these need kind of, some of these are decaying and they need kind of intervention. So if you can see, the earlier repair board used to change the timber with timber, and later on the timber members became replaced with steel. But later on in 1990s and 95, the whole building underwent reconstruction because, as I mentioned to you, it was the FSI, what they had consumed was more. But we started losing the architectural character. But when we came down to 2000, the repair board started redoing redevelopment themselves, and they didn't find it to be very successful. So then the private builders started coming in, and you can see how the high rise and how the kind of towers which have started now. So this is how slowly the grain gets eroded. What was the building height now becomes the podium, parking, and then the building goes taller than that. Having said this, the roads and the infrastructure is not really has been looked into, which is a matter of concern. This is a photograph of a normal grain. You can see the Muhammad Ali Road flyover, and this is the grain of Baikala. And you can see how, how you have these streets going, from top to bottom, which is north to south, which forms the bazaar, and how this is now getting altered. These are the buildings which constitutes unloved, unprotected heritage, which are under the threat of being demolished. The one in Jermel, you already have the balconies which have been removed. So you can see how the character gets, you have something which was an integral part of the character, which has now got lost. Now, it's a common fact that if you don't have good rents, the building is not going to be maintained. So there's negligence, no periodical maintenance, and increase in deterioration. And every monsoons we keep hearing a list of 200, 300 buildings coming out, which becomes unsafe. So everyone then jumps on for redeveloping it, but conservation is never given a chance or an opportunity. And that's where the plea, or that's where the conservationists have a request to the government to give an encouragement to this. Now, these are the things which are happening, that when the buildings are pulled down, this is the kind of scale which you come on the left. What you can see is what the existing heritage building would have been. So what people try to do is they try to imitate that portion of heritage, and they construct a glass tower, which is not very justifiable because the two characters are totally different. And these buildings keep going taller and taller. The one on the right was a chawl, which has been redeveloped opposite Bombay Central, and it's still going taller. You can still see the crane on the top. Now, through some positive examples and case studies, we are trying to demonstrate how conservation can work, what are the challenges and what are the opportunities which these kind of project gives you. I start deliberately with a landmark building, and then slowly I'll go into the grain. This is the Mahajiani Dargah, which is 1908. It's just about 100 years old. And it was in a state of quite a neglected, there were a lot of concrete additions of the minarets. The dome was leaking. You had cement concrete, which was used in the inside. The window panes were broken. And this is the overall effect. Sometimes it was used for film shoots, and people painted over the stone, and this is how it looked. The broken glasses, besides the sea, they covered and they protected it with the help of the chadar, which was given for the, this thing. It was not a permanent solution to make it watertight. It had become dilapidated, so they had propped it up, certain arches, they had bricked it up, there were ad hoc additions. So this is how, our heritage properties are looked after. But when the owners or when the users decide to really conserve it, a lot of changes can happen, which is for good. And this is the first thing which we started, was to attend to the dome. Externally and internally, and we discovered that there was a lot of cement plaster which was done. Some of the cornices were missing. So following it from a true conservation point of view, we restored it back in lime plaster, and you bought the cornices back, which are the integral features of this interior space. We had a major challenge that the stones were painted layers and layers. Now, it's not easy to remove the stone. If you scrape it, we tend to damage it because it's a soft Porbandar stone. We were fortunate that we were working on Flora Fountain, where steam was used by the conservators. And there were a lot of people, the contractors, who were trained in this process. So we reintroduced this technique of using steam. Again, sometimes maybe are experimenting with conservation because we don't have established this thing. This is what we found, and what we found was to be least damaging to the stone. And very carefully this was done. We also had to revive a lot of traditional craftsmanship, which was the limestone work. So we found contacts with the masons from Palitana who were working in Porbandar stone. They came in and they measured, and they sent us these kind of missing drills, minarets, and other pieces which were then put back. Being close to the sea, the lime surki plaster which was there was eroded. We had to redo it, and it was done in lime surki again, using like-to-like materials. And similarly, the woodwork, again, being a building so close to the coast, the wear and tear is fairly large. These were fixed windows which needed to be carved into these kind of special, arches, multifoil arches. So these were also revived. And instead of using large embossed glass, we decided we'll go for some colored glass, and we try to keep the glass plain so that when the sun sets and when the sun rises, the glass gives a different kind of a effect, and it enhances and the tranquility of the space inside. Having said this, it's again, as I said, I'll talk about the opportunities and the challenges of it. We also had to structurally repair and strengthen the verandas. It's a very unique typology, which is not seen in Mumbai, which is where you have verandas and courtyards, and you have a very unique dome. Normally, you see domes which are on a square, but this is an elongated dome on a rectangular, something like a submarine. So this is the courtyard, and we had to restore its wall plates and structural system. And you can see the entire thing when it is restored. So here these were following the normal established conservation norms and making it functional. But having said this, now comes to the opportunities and challenges. I was trying to use, this is a very recent photograph. You can see some mosque and algae which has come. So the question comes is, when you clean the paint, what do you do next? Because the users, they feel more comfortable painting it. But from a conservation point of view, you've decided to remove the paint and you want to make it, you leave it like that and try to make it do this thing. Use of chemicals is again a subject of, debate. Some people advocate use of chemicals. I had applied it, but it didn't last so long. So the question is whether should one use or should one do periodic maintenance? These are some of the issues which are cropping up, and the ones need to be addressed. It was a grade 1 building, but it was lower to grade 2. It was neglected, and I'm sure if it is, if a review is done of the grading after it's restored, people would like to raise the grade higher, perhaps. As funds were limited, we had to work it in a most economical manner. And the difficulty was that we were working in a site which was on an outcrop. Erecting scaffolding was not easy, and the wind and the rains really were the challenges which were there, because they are phenomenally strong there. And we had to see that what we are doing is maintenance free and last as long as it's possible. One good thing has happened is that once this place has been restored, it has become into, a lot of people have started visiting it, and it's helping in kind of pilgrim tourism, which is something which is very important, and it's a byproduct of conservation. So these were some of the things which was there. There's another very interesting building which is personally one of my finest buildings in Mumbai, which is Hirabag, which is again 1905. So all these buildings are about century old, and it was designed in such a way that the shops would subsidize the activity of a dharamsala on the top floor. But unfortunately, you had the rent control, and the building started getting neglected and decayed. This is how the building was when we intervened in 2007. It has a very colonial Gothic exterior facade, but interior is completely different and a very Indianized with a courtyard. And interestingly, it's, as I said to you, it's one of the most intelligent buildings. So while we were working on the building and while we were trying to refurbish it, we started discovering some very ornate details of stencils and something unexpected from a normal grain of the city. And this is where we could help in restoring it back. And what it has done is magical. We provided, it's now become an air conditioned space because you can't keep the windows open. The honking and the noise level outside in CP Tank Buleshwar is very large. So the windows remain shut, so we had to air condition it. And now these halls are being used for various activities, and it started generating funds, which then helps in subsidizing the dharamsalas, which is the basic function of this building. So, conservation can work as a tool. And of course, this was a listed grade 2 building. So I'm started with the building, the earlier one, which was grade 1. This is grade 2. And slowly I'll be going down to grade 3 and precinct buildings. So this is how the spaces inside, after we did one building, the clients themselves did the other building. So which was very good and encouraging that, they picked up the essence of conservation and, used it further. And this is what is an example, because it is easy to pull down these kind of spaces and go for the buildings as what you see in the background. But these are the hidden jewels which binds the city and the area socially and cohesively. So again, as I mentioned to you, it had to be economical. We had to see that it becomes sustainable. And we revived a lot of lost art and craft, like gilding, stencil painting, lime arraish, lime plaster work. The challenges were that it's all located in very busy area. And, it's not an easy job to construct, erect a scaffolding, to bring the materials in, to integrate these services, which we've tried. So these are this thing, but the happiness which you get when you see it being used, and you see it being used in a very positive manner, and people visiting it, is very encouraging. So many of our buildings look very simple from outside, and if you restore or if you refurbish them properly, these are hidden jewels. The other one such building is, it's a commercial building located on DN Road. And as you know, DN Road is the most important road which we have. The buildings which are more significant are the ones which are on the western side, which came after the demolition of the fort walls. But what I'm referring to is the building as shown in the red, which is a 1925 building. So in 2 years time, it would be 2 to 3 years time, it would be celebrating its centenary. And it has very fine urban design. And of course, now one of the building has been demolished on DN Road. So we really hope that nothing high rise comes in. There has been one building which has been redeveloped very sensitively in the same height and profile. So fingers crossed, but this forms a very important urban spine. And just to tell you that this building was served as a notice of being unsafe. So you could have pulled it down and you could have gone for a, for a redevelopment, but the clients decided, because they were housed here, but the building became unsafe. So they shifted and they decided that they'll restore this building to the original grandeur and will move back to this space. So this is how the building looked like. It was originally a ground plus 4-story building, but post-independence, when the FSI was given higher, most of the buildings on Fort area and on DN Road got a floor higher to go. And that was integrated very sensitively and without disturbing the overall ambience and of the place and of the urban design. So this is what it is. And you have a metro station coming out. What you can see is the piling work happening for a station outlet. And this is how the building was neglected. And of course, the rent control comes into it. You had vegetation growths, you had areas which were inaccessible, the pipes never functioned. And you had on the ceiling a corrugated AC sheet, roofing. And you can see the beautiful 2 towers, VT and BMC from behind. When we opened the fall ceiling, we discovered all the structural trusses to be completely unsafe. It had jack arches on the lower floor, which also were giving signs of, showing signs of distress in certain areas. It had some beautiful Minton tiles, but they were badly damaged. Wooden staircase, toilets which were in complete mess, as what happens with many of our buildings in Fort area, and the electricals. So again, all these needed to be planned in a manner which was affordable, economical, and to be done. Good documentation of drawing was done. Permissions were applied to the Heritage Committee and then to the Municipal Corporation. The Heritage Committee permissions came very fast, but the Municipal Corporation's permission took very long time, which becomes a deterrent that if you don't get good, quick permissions, a lot of people then, get stuck for repairs. This is how the process went. I'll be very quick with it. I can show you that the trusses were documented, the corrugated AC sheets were removed, the trusses were analyzed, they were repaired, and they were strengthened. We realized that the walls on which they were resting, which was added by a floor up after 1950s, was not very safe. So we had to reconstruct that walls. The site being abutting on DN Road, you had roads on all the sides. So there was hardly any space where you could really keep your material stack or erect a scaffolding in a comfortable manner. So this is where the tiles have gone back, which blends with the character of the fort area. Also, it helps in thermal insulation, especially when you're planning to air condition. So this is where, we followed that kind of an approach to go back to its original details. These are works which are happening within the spaces inside, which was very tricky, as I said to you, because it was abutting the road. We had to introduce some new slabs which were added with the help of structural engineer. It was a great teamwork of everyone. The external facade was then taken because once you made the building watertight from the top, then we started attacking the facades. The facades were facing the west side. They never had any chajjas or windows, so we gave small drip molds. The top floor, which was added later on, had internal gutters, but we shifted the gutters outside, collected the water in hopper heads and drained it off. And you can see the paint, paint which was done on stones were removed. This is the rear facade, and this was again documented. Again, use of steam to remove the paint in a manner which will not damage the stone. And this is how the rear facade was made. Then we started working on floors, addressing the jack arches, because when the water used to come in from the west side windows, the first 2 or 3 arches were very badly damaged. So you didn't have all the arches damaged, but certain arches were damaged. So again, using conservation philosophy of doing minimum intervention, what is desirable, and improving on technique. So the mesh of reinforcement has been added as an extra protection, and that binds it. And the same technology of jack arches was continued. And in certain areas, we put a mesh which binds the whole floor together, as advised by the structural engineer. And you have a very large space which is now available for adaptive reuse. Now, this is where the clients will move in, who are the owners of the building. So they have plowed in the money back to have a building restored, and that has enhanced the property value. Now, other works was the floors below. These are tenanted properties. So when you're working on such properties, the tenants don't shift. So people keep repairing it as how they can repair it from inside, one steel joist, another, and then have false ceiling. So this is how we got an opportunity to convince some of them to vacate their offices for a few months. We casted new slabs, and you can see the condition also. This was highly precarious. And again, following the same conservation techniques of using like-to-like materials, reintroducing jack arches, and we discouraged use of false ceiling so that the structural system of the building is exposed. Again, all documentation done. You can see in the red what was reconstructed, what was good was left. Certain areas, only the tiles needed to be changed, and the toilet areas was completely redone. So very quickly, this is just to show you any typical fort area building, but once you treat it properly, it starts transforming, and you are increasing the property value of it. And the best thing is that the footprint remains the same, the people remain the same, and you're not loading the fragile infrastructure. The toilets were certainly the most precarious area. So we casted new slabs with sunk slabs for waterproofing details to happen. And of course, the COVID also happened at this same time, and the importance of having good hygienes and other thing was also realized, and which was endorsed with what we were doing. Electrical forms a very important component. So all this needed to be planned in a very integral manner, one thing at one time, and then doing this. Of course, the lockdown gave an opportunity to, because most of the offices were closed, so we could work on the electricals and could redo the electricals. Now, as I mentioned to you, the challenges, there are many challenges because when you're working on a very tight site where you can't unload the material, where do you keep the material? How do you work? So these are a few things which, one has to learn in project management, how to handle it. The other thing was that suddenly the metro started coming in. So where we used to unload a truck, that also stopped. They cordoned that area too. Now, for this thing, the permissions, as I mentioned to you, the municipal permissions do take a long time, and it's online. And sometimes you have to wait for a very long time, which is really not very desirable. The opportunities were several, that it given, you were given a free hand to do what you wanted, and with the cooperation of the tenants who didn't contribute anything, we managed to do a lot of work. It was minimum intervention, using of like to like material, and doing an economical repair so that the other buildings can follow the same kind of path further. The property now commands good property value. They have an entire second floor which is being leased out, and hopefully with the lease rent, they should be able to maintain the building. So this is how conservation can be used to restore the grain. And these grains don't need to then become landmarks, and the established pattern of our city, which was the finest city east of Suez, can be retained. So these are just very quick before after photographs for you to just see the difference which it brings. Of course, it's a very slow, tedious process of 2 to 3 years. It can't happen overnight. A lot of personal attention and intervention is required. And this is the difference which it brings. This is the top floor, and this is the view which you get from the top of the terrace now. Now, coming to the real residential grain, I was fortunate that I got a chance to work with Garib Zarosti and Rainthan Fund, a charity which deals with the housing of poor Parsis. And this is something which is interesting, is that in 19th century, community housing was an integral feature of development of a city. And these are very evidently seen in Parsi colonies, which we have several of them, of different scales and typologies. So this is the one which is located in Tardev. And these are the buildings which are there. You can see from the one mentioned in blue, the one who decided to go high rise is disturbing the entire pattern. The 5 buildings which we worked were not listed. They were just simple buildings. And once you have conserved it, it's given a new kind of a lease to them, and it also has given a respect that they can come under heritage character if a revised listing is done there. Housing has remained a most important component right since with Mumbai from the 19th century, and City Improvement Trust, Bombay Municipal Corporation, all catered to such things to cater and monitor to the growing needs of the city. The Chawls became an affordable single unit housing which was served both economical and social needs, and they were developed both by private and by the state respectively, and was an accepted typology for development. Through accommodation of space was limited and affordable, it kept a good socio-cultural interaction, which was designed keeping in mind the climatic consideration. Now that's the very important component on the point which I want to highlight. These are the buildings which, in case if these get pulled down, you get these kind of high rises and this kind of new typology which comes in. So these are the 5 buildings which we started. We started working on this first one on the right, which is the Wadia building. We did the structural repairs. This is how the facade was, very normal, simple, discrete buildings. A lot of vegetation growth, a lot of, there was complete neglect. A lot of people had added a lot of things. There was problems in certain areas of slabs. So we again decided to use the like-to-like material because we never changed the larger part, only the one which was damaged was replaced. We found a unique way of having boardings with the COBA, and then for extra protection, on advice of structural engineer, a mesh was put and concreted. The whole facade was replastered, but we've used cement. We've not used lime because this was not a place where you could demonstrate that. Here we were trying to save the building and try to save the character. And the cornices and the missing details were reintroduced in cement. And then the roof was the most important component, which of all the 5 buildings which were addressed. Now, this one particular slide is a very interesting slide because it shows you on the left top is how the area was conceived. On the right, you can see how the new high rises have started developing it. And if you don't conserve these, you're going to get something as what you see in the bottom left slides. This is what is going to happen to the entire city. So the choices are very clear that these are not the kind of desirable things which we want to go for. And hence conservation or repairs of these old properties is something which should be done because it provides affordable housing. It retains the socio-cultural pattern and it doesn't load the fragile infrastructure of the city. So this is just to show you the process as how these buildings have undergone transformation. The color was chosen with the help of the people there, that one of the buildings already had a blue color, and that's how the color continued, so that it has a distinct stamp that it belongs to this charity trust. And chhajas were incorporated and other details were enhanced, like the toilets which were there. This is another example of another housing colony, which is not located very far from there, Mumbai Central, opposite Nair Hospital. It's called the Lal Chimney Complex. This one particular building was very unsafe in its structural condition, and it had to be completely to be restored. And you can see the condition from inside. Everyone thinks adding steel and steel, we can keep prolonging the life, but it's not real because no one wants to vacate the building. So we were fortunate that we decided one half of the building to be completely made vacant, and we shifted the people in certain areas which the trust had available space, and where they were shifted, and we could work on these things. Everyone had done some ad hoc changes, so all this was streamlined. The first thing, as I mentioned, is always again starts with the roof work. The most important thing is to make the building watertight, to repair all the roofs. Mangalore tile roof work will become obsolete in couple of years because we are fast losing this kind of traditional art. You can see the conditions of these structural members, which were completely dilapidated. It was a miracle that some of these were surviving. So using whatever was good, we casted slabs. Sometimes we casted one flat slab. Sometimes we used the same eye sections, and whatever was economical and faster, that was the technique which was used. Upgraded the toilets and the other facilities, and the lost details of the buildings were again put back. And again, following the conservation norms of using minimum intervention, what was required, we could manage to restore these buildings back to its original grandeur. Now, these were all done in 2012. It's been more than 10 years now. You can see the details of these buildings coming back, the box grills being removed. And just imagine how the buildings which we consider neglected and which we want to pull down, if you restore it, these are the same buildings, which become a delight taking photographs also, like this particular one. Now, the misconception is that conservation is expensive, which is not the case, as compared to redevelopment, where you go into a lot of 3,000 to 4,000 rupees, which you're spending apart from resources and apart from loading the infrastructure. Here, we did several interventions in all the 5 buildings, and our cost ranged between 860 rupees. I'm talking of 2009 and 12. For a complete restoration, including structural portion for the building. Some buildings we did the common areas, we did the exteriors and the roof, which costed about 414 rupees. Certain areas we just did the roof and the facade, which costed us 330. Modi building, it was just the painting outside and repairing the facade, so that was 200. So it's a misconception that conservation is expensive. It works out very economical, and once it's been done, you have to take care of it as a periodical maintenance, which is important. To end up, I would just try to come to when I came and when I was practicing conservation, history was a very important component, and authenticity and other things. But now I'm seeing conservation in a different light. And when I come to a simple thing is that if today's architecture cannot be tomorrow's heritage, then it's a good reason why we should encourage conservation. What we really see is something which doesn't have good urban design, doesn't have good value which will last you so longer. What we find very surprising is urban renewal and regeneration is never given a chance. The whole focus seems to be on redevelopment, and in redevelopment, scale, density, and land use should be controlled to match with the character of the place. Because what we try to do is we follow a common bylaw systems, but at least for these heritage areas, we should have stricter guidelines for grade 1, grade 2, and grade 3, and for precincts. Ideally, if the buildings are good, these should not be touched down, these should not be pulled down, we should reuse them. Now, something important which I've come in 30 years of practice is that we've understood that change is the inevitable part of nature, but the change for the need will always integrate and will blend. But the change for the greed is what creates the conflict, and this is what you see in the city. And I've realized that the government doesn't give any incentive, and no incentive is required. But if they only allow you to give quick permissions, a lot of people want to repair their buildings and want to do a good job, but that should be encouraged. And the last is that you always can't do the best possible solution. So least bad compromises is something which is what I've tried to do in my practice and through these projects. Thank you.